Hi guys and welcome back to the Ivy Lounge YouTube channel. My name is Marcus and today I'll be your host. Today what I'll be sharing is a personal experience that I personally went through when I was doing the IB. It's basically about how I chose to completely or almost completely forego language and literature and instead focus on other subjects. Eventually it did pay off as I eventually got 41 points for my IB with 6s and 7s in all the other subjects that I chose to focus on, and end up with a 5 for language and literature. So let me go through a few things. First of all, which is why I did that. There are actually two reasons to it and they are kind of complementary, but let me just get into it. So for the first part, which is why I chose to forgo language and literature itself, I was actually already struggling pretty badly in it. First of all, I had chosen to switch over from SL to HL in my first year of doing the IVDP. And because of this, I was pretty far behind relative to my classmates. I also did not really put much emphasis into it, and for the most of the 1 year plus, I was really focusing on my other subjects such as mathematics and chemistry, and of course the others. But essentially what happened was that I did not really put that much effort into it, and by the time I had reached about the 6-month mark before the IBDP exam, I was already pretty far behind. So what I thought to myself was, hey, language and literature is something that actually needs to be cultivated and developed over a pretty long period of time. So by the time it was June, I take the November paper. So by the time it was June, I kind of already felt like it was unsalvageable. And my main goal at that time was to essentially get a 4 or 5 out of the 7. The other reason why I chose to do this was because I wanted to focus more on the subjects that I felt I was more passionate and that I felt had a higher chance of getting a good grade at. So those two subjects in particular were mathematics and chemistry. I did struggle in those, but I felt like with the practice that I was getting, the improvement that I was seeing, and basically the interest that I had in these two subjects, I would be able to get a higher grade instead of language and literature. So I essentially chose to just forgo language and literature, focus my 110% into these two subjects particularly, and in the end I got a 7 for mathematics SL and 6 for chemistry SL. The other subjects that I was taking, I was basically doing pretty okay, scoring 6s and 7s throughout the year, so I wasn't too worried about that. Okay, so let's get into what I did exactly. Let's start with language and literature. So what I did was to essentially make sure that I could pass with a pretty large margin. I didn't want to get a 3 because that would definitely pull down my whole grade, and that was also risky. So throughout the year, I actually made sure that my internal assessments, for example the oral component, I had actually scored, I think, pretty well. I put in really a lot of effort to make sure that those components were done well. So leading up to the exam, I knew that I already had some marks in the bank, and all I had to do was to really make sure that I put up a reasonably good fight in the final exam. And thus what I did was really pretty bare. I just read the books, skimmed through it briefly, looked at websites that did summaries for it, memorized a few quotes, looked at previous practices, and that was basically my whole preparation for language and literature. So it's really bare, and it basically only could guarantee that I would have a small margin after pass. What is also important, which I'll share again later, was that I really made sure that I did well in my other subjects. Because if you were to follow a similar strategy as myself, this is a pretty risky move, because if you don't do well in your other subjects and you forgo this subject, it will mean that your overall grade is going to be pretty disastrous. So you have to make sure that you really put in a lot of effort into the other subjects that you are banking on. Thankfully for me, the risk was worth it as I eventually scored a pretty good grade. It really met my expectations. So, should you do it? Only do it if you are pretty desperate. If you are like me and you have waited until maybe 6 months before the exam to start preparing for a certain subject, you are most likely quite late. It also depends on the nature of the subject. For certain subjects, you can catch up pretty easily. But for other subjects, especially the languages, I feel that these take more time and practice more getting used to it. And thus, if you only start about 6 months before the paper, or even less, I would say that you have a pretty low chance of actually getting a high 6 or a 7. And thus, it may be more worth it to concentrate on the other subjects that you feel that you have a better shot at getting a good grade at. Lastly, if you are failing the subject, I would suggest that you do focus on actually getting your subject to a pass, and in fact, get it to more than a pass. This is because for subjects like these, which are more subjective, there is a chance that you actually may not do well, and it may actually constitute a failure, which would essentially affect your whole IB grade. So I hope this video has been helpful. I hope that you learn a new thing today, more about this strategy, and use it wisely, use it carefully. Take this advice basically with a pinch of salt. Do not use this advice as a way to not study that subject, but use it strategically. Let me know what you think of this strategy in the comment section below. And as usual, if you liked our content, do remember to like and subscribe, and head on down to iblounge.org if you want more resources or if you need any academic support. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.